Montana Territory, 1878. The letter arrived on Eliza Rose's 20th birthday, bringing not celebration but crushing despair. Her father lay on his deathbed as she read the crisp parchment by lantern light, its official seal and flowing script contrasting sharply with their humble cabin's worn furniture. "Father, this cannot be right," she whispered, her voice quavering. "It says Caldwell Railroad has purchased our property, and we must vacate within the month." Jacob Rose coughed weakly, his once powerful farmer's frame now withered by consumption. "They've been buying everything along the proposed railway line. I refused their first offers, thought I could hold out for more. But this says we've been sold into an arrangement," Eliza continued, her fingers trembling. "That I am to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "It was the only way to secure your future," her father rasped. "Charles Caldwell proposed it himself when he came last month while you were visiting the Hansons. His son needs a wife. You'll have security, a grand house in Helena. You're trading me like cattle?" Tears streamed down Eliza's cheeks. "No, child. Saving you from destitution." His hand clutched hers. "I'll be gone soon. The farm is failing. Winter comes, and what then? At least this way, you'll be cared for." 3 days later, Jacob Rose was buried on the hillside overlooking the 100 acres he'd worked for 20 years. Eliza stood alone by the fresh grave, her simple black dress flapping in the autumn wind, when hoofbeats announced visitors. 2 men on horseback approached, one elderly with silver hair and a regal bearing, the other younger, perhaps 30, with cold eyes and a rigid posture. Behind them, a gleaming black carriage waited on the dirt road. "Miss Rose," the older man called, not bothering to dismount. "I am Charles Caldwell. I believe you received our communication. This is my son, Frederick." Frederick Caldwell barely acknowledged her with a curt nod. His eyes surveyed the humble farmhouse and fields with obvious distaste. "I'm sorry about your father," Charles continued without sincerity. "The arrangement stands. Pack your belongings. We depart for Helena within the hour." Eliza straightened her spine, clutching her mother's worn Bible to her chest. "Mr. Caldwell, I've only just buried my father. Surely you can grant me a few days to—" "The railway waits for no one, Miss Rose," Charles interrupted. "Construction begins next week. This land will be cleared immediately." Frederick finally spoke, his voice as cold as the approaching winter. "Father, perhaps we should allow Miss Rose a day to gather her things properly." Charles shot his son a disapproving glance, but conceded with a sharp nod. "One day? We'll return tomorrow at noon." As they rode away, Eliza caught Frederick glancing back, his expression unreadable beneath his expensive hat. She returned to the empty farmhouse, her future sealed by ink on paper and her father's desperate final act. The Caldwell mansion in Helena stood like a monument to wealth amid the growing city. 3 stories of imposing brick with tall windows and wraparound porches, it housed not just the family, but the administrative center of Caldwell Railroad, the empire that had swallowed countless small properties like the Rose Farm. Eliza arrived wearing her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother. She carried a single trunk containing everything she owned in the world. The contrast between her modest appearance and the opulence surrounding her couldn't have been more stark. Frederick met her at the door with a formal bow. "Miss Rose, welcome to your new home." "Mr. Caldwell." She nodded, maintaining her dignity despite feeling like a beggar at a king's gate. "My father has arranged for us to be married tomorrow at the Episcopal Church," he informed her as a servant took her trunk. "He prefers matters settled quickly." "So quickly?" Without even time to know one another. Eliza couldn't hide her shock. Frederick's expression remained impassive. "Father believes in efficiency above all. Business contracts must be executed promptly." "Is that what I am? A business contract?" Eliza asked, her voice quiet but steady. Something flickered in Frederick's eyes, perhaps surprise at her directness, but he quickly recovered. "We all have our duties, Miss Rose. Mine is to expand the railroad westward. Yours will be to provide a suitable home and family name. And if I refuse, then you forfeit the financial security promised to your father, and this house would become much less welcoming." He gestured toward the grand staircase. "Mrs. Patterson will show you to your room. Dinner is at 7. The following day, Eliza Rose became Mrs. Frederick Caldwell in a ceremony attended by Helena's elite. She spoke her vows clearly despite the hollow feeling in her chest. Her new husband remained formal, distant. No love, no passion. Merely 2 signatures on a marriage certificate and a perfunctory kiss that barely touched her lips. The reception at the Caldwell mansion was lavish, though Eliza recognized not a single face among the guests. She stood beside Frederick, a porcelain smile fixed on her face as Helena's society women evaluated her humble origins with critical eyes and whispered comments behind gloved hands. "She's from that farm near Diamond City, you know," one woman murmured just loudly enough for Eliza to hear. Charles Caldwell practically had to twist Frederick's arm to agree to the match. "Whatever for. She's pretty enough, I suppose, but hardly the sort one would expect for the Caldwell heir. Something about railroad right-of-ways, I heard. Old Jacob Rose had land they needed." Eliza's cheeks burned, but she held her head high. Frederick, overhearing the exchange, surprised her by taking her hand. Not tenderly, but possessively, a clear message to the gossipers that, whatever the circumstances, she was now a Caldwell. That night, he came to her room as expected of a new husband. The encounter was brief and mechanical, devoid of warmth. When it was over, he returned to his own quarters without a word. Eliza stared at the ceiling of her new bedroom, tears silently streaming into her hair, wondering if this emptiness would define the rest of her life. Days turned to weeks. Frederick spent most of his time at the railroad offices or traveling to inspect construction sites. Charles Caldwell made it clear that Eliza's primary duty was to learn proper society manners and prepare to host functions that would benefit the railroad's business interests. "Your background is unfortunate," the elder Caldwell told her bluntly one morning, "but not insurmountable. Mrs. Winchester will instruct you on proper etiquette. You represent the Caldwell name now." Mrs. Winchester, a stern widow hired specifically for this purpose, drilled Eliza daily on everything from table settings to appropriate conversation topics. "Never discuss politics, religion, or anything of substance," she instructed. "Your role is decorative, Mrs. Caldwell. Pleasant, agreeable, and silent unless addressed directly." Eliza endured these lessons with outward compliance while inwardly rebelling. At night, alone in her grand bedroom, she read voraciously from the Caldwell Library, books on business, railroad engineering, Montana politics, subjects Mrs. Winchester would have deemed entirely inappropriate. One evening in December, she was startled when Frederick entered her bedroom unexpectedly. He found her with a book on railroad financing open on her lap. "What are you doing?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. Eliza closed the book but didn't hide it. "Educating myself about our family business." "Our family business?" Frederick raised an eyebrow, approaching to examine the volume. "This is hardly suitable reading for a lady. And yet I understand it perfectly well." Eliza met his gaze. "Your father's upcoming bond issuance seems quite risky given the uncertain situation with the Northern Pacific's competing line." Frederick's expression shifted from dismissal to surprise. "You've been studying father's business dealings?" "I've been observing, listening, reading." She gestured to the book. "I may be a farmer's daughter, but I'm not ignorant, Mr. Caldwell." "Frederick," he corrected automatically, then seemed to reconsider his entire approach. He sat on the edge of the bed, studying her with new interest. "What else have you observed?" "That your father's plan to push through Blackfoot territory will likely result in conflict the company can ill afford. That your timber supplier, Mr. Ellsworth, has been charging you 20% above market rate. That the new bridge designs from Chicago will require modifications for our mountain terrain." Frederick stared at her in astonishment. "How could you possibly know all this?" "The staff speaks freely when they think I'm just an ignorant farm girl." Eliza shrugged. "And your father leaves documents in the study, believing I can't comprehend them." For the first time since their marriage, Frederick smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his handsome face. "Well, Mrs. Caldwell, it appears I've underestimated you." The encounter marked a turning point. Frederick began including Eliza in discussions about the railroad, first privately in their home, then occasionally at business dinners. Charles Caldwell strongly disapproved, but was gradually overruled as Frederick demonstrated increasing independence from his father's control. Spring arrived, bringing renewed construction activity along the railroad line. Eliza persuaded Frederick to take her on an inspection tour of the western expansion. Despite Charles's vehement objections, they departed for a 2-week journey by private railcar. Away from Helena's society and the elder Caldwell's disapproving presence, something shifted between them. Frederick watched with growing admiration as Eliza conversed intelligently with engineers and foremen, often spotting practical problems the office-bound planners had missed. The local farmers won't appreciate this drainage plan, she noted at one site, examining blueprints spread across a makeshift table. You're diverting runoff onto grazing lands. The engineer looked affronted. Mrs. Caldwell, with all due respect, she's right, Frederick interrupted, examining the topographical maps more closely. Revise this section. We'll pay a bit more now to avoid lawsuits later. Later, in their private railcar, Frederick poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering one to Eliza. You continue to surprise me, Mrs. Caldwell. She accepted the glass, an intimacy that would have scandalized Helena's society. I lived on that land. I know what water does in spring thaw. You know many things, it seems. His voice had softened, the perpetual formality melting. Why did you agree to this marriage? You could have refused, found another way. Eliza gazed out the window at the Montana landscape passing by, the same hills and valleys she'd grown up among, now being transformed by the very railroad that had taken her land. My father was dying. He believed he was securing my future. She took a sip of whiskey, feeling the burn. And perhaps he was right, though not in the way he imagined. Frederick moved to sit beside her. And now, do you regret it? Their eyes met, and for the first time, Eliza saw vulnerability in her husband's face. I regret that it began as a transaction, but I'm beginning to think it might become something more. That night, when Frederick came to her bed, everything was different. His touch was gentle, exploratory, his eyes seeking her response. Their lovemaking, for it truly was that now, not the mechanical fulfillment of duty, awakened feelings Eliza had never expected to find in this arranged marriage. Afterward, lying in his arms as the railcar rocked gently on the tracks, she felt a strange new emotion, hope. Perhaps this union forged in business could still yield happiness. Their return to Helena brought immediate conflict with Charles Caldwell. The elder railroad baron was furious that Frederick had implemented several of Eliza's suggestions regarding the western expansion. You're allowing a farmer's daughter to influence million-dollar decisions, Charles thundered during a private family dinner. Have you lost your mind, boy? Eliza understands the territory and the people better than our engineers from back east, Frederick replied calmly. Her insights have already saved us considerable trouble. This is precisely why I opposed this marriage from the start, Charles said, glaring at Eliza. She's attempting to undermine my authority, to turn you against sound business practice. Eliza set down her fork. With respect, Mr. Caldwell, I have no desire to undermine anything. I merely want the railroad to succeed while treating fairly with the people whose lands it crosses. Sentimental nonsense, Charles scoffed. Business is business. We bought those properties legally, at pennies on the dollar from desperate people, Eliza countered, her voice steady. Including my father. You should be grateful, girl. Look at where you are now, instead of starving on that worthless plot of dirt. Frederick's hand slammed onto the table. That's enough, father. You will speak to my wife with respect. The elder Caldwell's face reddened. Your wife? She's a convenience, boy. A land purchase with a heartbeat. Don't tell me you've developed feelings for this acquisition. The silence that followed was deafening. Frederick rose slowly from his chair, his expression stone cold. You've made your position clear, father. Perhaps it's time Eliza and I established our own household. Don't be absurd, Charles sputtered. Everything you have comes from me. The position at the railroad, this house, my education, my 7 years of work expanding the line, my engineering patents, Frederick interrupted. Yes, you gave me my start, but I've earned my place. Eliza watched this confrontation with mixed emotions, pride in Frederick's defense, anxiety about the consequences, and a growing realization that her husband was choosing her over his father's approval. If you leave this house, you leave the company, Charles threatened. Frederick nodded as though he'd expected this. Then I'll tender my resignation in the morning. Later that night, as they packed their essentials, Eliza questioned the decision. Frederick, you can't abandon everything you've built. The railroad is your life's work. The railroad is my father's obsession, he corrected, carefully placing his engineering journals in a leather case. And perhaps once it was mine too. But I've come to realize there are more important things. He'll relent eventually, Eliza said, though without conviction. Charles Caldwell was not a man who changed his mind easily. Perhaps, but we won't wait for his approval. Frederick paused in his packing to take her hands. I have savings, connections. We can start anew. Doing what? Eliza asked, practical as always. Frederick smiled. Actually, I've been thinking about that. The major railroads are established now, but they're poorly connected. I've been developing plans for a system of smaller connector lines that would link communities currently isolated from the main routes. A network of secondary railways? Eliza caught on immediately, serving the towns and farms the major companies ignored. Exactly. Less profitable individually, but collectively valuable, and providing real service to communities that need it. Eliza's mind raced with possibilities. The farmers near my old home have to transport crops nearly 30 miles to reach a station. A connector line through that valley would transform their livelihoods. And with your knowledge of the land and the people, Frederick left the thought unfinished, watching her face light up with understanding. We could build something that serves the territory instead of just exploiting it. Frederick drew her close. We could build something together. They departed the Caldwell mansion the next morning, taking only what rightfully belonged to them. Charles Caldwell watched from the study window, his face impassive as they loaded their belongings into a hired wagon. He made no move to stop them, nor to reconcile. The first year was difficult. They rented a modest house in Helena while Frederick established his new company, Frontier Connector Railways. Investors were initially skeptical of the concept and hesitant to back anyone who had broken ties with the powerful Charles Caldwell. Eliza proved invaluable during this period. She reached out to farming communities and small-town merchants, gathering commitments for freight shipments if the connector lines were built. Her background as a farmer's daughter, once deemed a liability, became their greatest asset. People trusted her in ways they never would have trusted a railroad man alone. You were right, Frederick told her one evening as they reviewed the pledges she had secured from 3 rural communities. They're willing to invest their own money to bring the line to their towns. Because they know we're offering fair terms, Eliza replied, warming her hands on a cup of tea. Their rented house was far less grand than the Caldwell mansion, the furnishings simple, not trying to take their land or control their businesses. Frederick watched her with open admiration. You've transformed how I see this entire industry, Eliza. We're transforming it together, she corrected gently. By their second wedding anniversary, Frontier Connector Railways had secured sufficient investment to begin construction on their first line, a 40-mile connector between Helena and several agricultural communities to the northeast, including the area where Eliza had grown up. The day construction began, they held a small ceremony at the site. Unlike the grandiose events Charles Caldwell preferred, this gathering included local farmers, merchants, and the construction crew, people who would actually use and benefit from the railway. Eliza, now carrying their first child, drove the ceremonial golden spike with Frederick's hands guided over hers. The gathered crowd cheered as the hammer struck home, symbolizing not just the beginning of a railway, but a new approach to development in the territory. As they moved through the crowd afterward, accepting congratulations, a tall figure at the gathering's edge caught Frederick's attention. Charles Caldwell stood watching, his expression unreadable beneath his silver hair. Father, Frederick acknowledged, unconsciously stepping slightly in front of Eliza. I heard about your project. Charles's voice carried no warmth, but neither did it hold the anger of their last encounter. Interesting approach. Small lines, community investment. It's proving viable, Frederick replied cautiously. Charles nodded, his eyes moving to Eliza and lingering on her visible pregnancy. Something flickered in his expression, perhaps regret, perhaps simply calculation. Mrs. Caldwell, he said with formal correctness, you appear to have adapted well to the railway business. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell, Eliza replied evenly, though I prefer to think of it as the railway business adapting to better serve the people. A ghost of a smile touched the old man's lips. Still idealistic, I see. Practical, she corrected. Happy customers and supportive communities make for sustainable business. Charles considered this, then extracted an envelope from his coat. Your competitor to the south is planning an aggressive expansion that will threaten your southern connector plans. Frederick accepted the envelope cautiously. Why would you share this information with us? Perhaps I'm growing sentimental in my old age, Charles said dismissively. Or perhaps I simply prefer to see the Caldwell name succeed, even if the business model differs from my own. It wasn't an apology or a reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement, and perhaps the beginning of a different relationship. As Charles turned to leave, Eliza called after him. We're naming him Jacob Charles, after both grandfathers. You're welcome to visit your grandson when he arrives. The old man paused, his back still turned. I'll consider it, Mrs. Caldwell. With that, he departed, straight-backed and proud as ever. That was unexpected, Frederick murmured. Eliza squeezed his hand. Family is complicated, but not impossible. Over the next 5 years, Frontier Connector Railways grew steadily, linking previously isolated communities to the major rail lines. Their business model, fair land purchases, community investment, reasonable rates, proved sustainable if less immediately profitable than Charles Caldwell's aggressive approach. Relations with the elder Caldwell thawed gradually. He never fully approved of their methods, but he developed a grudging respect for their success. More importantly, he became a doting if somewhat formal grandfather to young Jacob Charles and his sister Elizabeth, born 2 years later. The true test of their business came during the financial panic of 1893, when railroads across the country faced bankruptcy. Major lines slashed services and raised rates desperately. Charles Caldwell's empire teetered on the brink of collapse due to overextension and enormous debt. Frontier Connector Railways, with its conservative growth and strong community relationships, weathered the storm better than most. When Charles Caldwell reluctantly approached his son for assistance, Frederick faced a difficult choice. He nearly ruined us when we started, Frederick reminded Eliza as they discussed the situation in their study. He called you an acquisition, treated our marriage as a business transaction. All true, Eliza acknowledged, pouring coffee for them both. Their home was now a handsome house near Helena's center, comfortable but not ostentatious. But he's also your father and our children's grandfather. What would you do? Frederick asked, trusting her judgment as he had come to do in all matters. Eliza considered carefully. Offer help, but with conditions. Not vindicatively, but to protect what we've built while honoring family obligations. The solution they crafted was a merger of sorts. Caldwell Railroad would maintain its name and Charles would remain its figurehead, but Frontier's management practices would be implemented throughout. Most importantly, the combined entity would follow the community-focused model Eliza and Frederick had pioneered. Charles Caldwell, faced with losing everything, accepted these terms with better grace than anyone expected. Perhaps age had softened him, or perhaps he finally recognized the wisdom in his daughter-in-law's approach. The signing ceremony took place in the Caldwell Mansion study, the same room where, years earlier, Charles had threatened to disinherit Frederick. Now the three Caldwells sat together at the massive oak desk, with young Jacob watching solemnly from a chair by the fireplace. As Charles signed the final document, he looked up at Eliza. You've proven me wrong, Mrs. Caldwell. I thought Frederick was throwing away his future when he chose you over my company. He wasn't choosing me over the company, Eliza corrected gently. He was choosing to build something better, something that would last. And you helped him do that. Charles set down his pen. I acquired your father's land thinking it was just dirt beneath the rails. I never realized its true value was the daughter it produced. Eliza thought of her father, of the desperate choice he'd made to secure her future. He would be pleased to know his sacrifice led to something worthwhile. Later that evening, as they walked home through Helena's streets, Frederick took Eliza's hand. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my father hadn't forced that marriage arrangement. Eliza smiled, watching their children walking ahead, little Elizabeth trying to match her brother's longer strides. I suspect we would have found each other eventually. Some things are simply meant to be. A farmer's daughter and a railroad baron's son? Frederick laughed softly. Hardly the most likely pairing. And yet, look what we've built together. Eliza gestured toward the railway office they were passing, its windows illuminated in the evening light. Maps of their growing network covered the walls inside. Lines connecting communities across Montana Territory, bringing prosperity and opportunity. Not just railways, Frederick said, drawing her close. A family, a future, worth more than all the gold in these mountains, Eliza agreed. As Montana moved toward statehood in 1889, the Caldwell rail system became essential infrastructure for the developing region. The company that had begun with a forced marriage and a land seizure had transformed into something neither Charles Caldwell nor Jacob Rose could have envisioned, a business that balanced profit with public good, expansion with conservation. And at its heart stood Eliza Rose Caldwell, once a simple farmer's daughter, now respected throughout the territory for her business acumen and fair dealing. The woman who had been acquired like a parcel of land had proven, beyond any doubt, that her true worth could never be measured in acres or gold, but in the community she helped build and the legacy she would leave behind. Frederick still marveled at this truth each morning when he woke beside her. The arrangement that had begun as his father's calculated business move had become the most valuable gift of his life, proof that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the places we least expect to look.